My name is Monk Grow, and I'm very pleased to have pianist Harold Mayburn with me today for the Jazz Archive. Welcome to Hamilton.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure listening to your numerous stories the last couple of days.
Oh, boy.
You are not a shy man, I
Well,
must say
you
that.
know, I try not to be.
I'm wondering if you were an outgoing kid.
No, you know, strangely enough, I was very shy. Believe it or not, I was very quiet, very shy. But as I got a little older, I got a little more, how do you put it, outgoing and aggressive in my manner, so to speak, when I moved to Chicago. But during the time I was in Memphis, Tennessee, I was really a quiet, shy kid.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, we think of Memphis as a heavy blues town.
Right.
Did you hear blues a lot growing up in their home, or did you
We
go
heard
out
it
to
in the home, and when I started getting into music, which was around the age of 15, 16, I guess you can say I'm a late bloomer, because being a self-taught musician, I never took piano lessons. We had to play the blues because that's the way it was. And we were drugged and disappointed because we wanted to play bebop. And the club owners would say, no, you got to get that bebop out of here. You running my customers out of here. In other words, we had to play music that they could dance to. So what we did, and when I said we, I'm speaking a lot about George Coleman's brother, who was a very good alto saxophonist. I played a lot with George Coleman's brother before I played with George Coleman. George Coleman's brother, Lucius Coleman, Lewis Smith, a drummer named Big Mo, and that was it because we didn't have but 2 or 3 bass players. And Jamil Nasser was one, he was out with B.B. King. So most times the piano players had to walk the bass line. So what we would do, we would play the blues, say the Huckabuck, which you later found out was Now's the Time, but it's really the Huckabuck, Paul Williams Huckabuck, da-da-da-da-da-da. So we would tell the drummer, keep the backbeat while the people would dance,
Mm-hmm.
And then once we got them dancing, we started playing the chord changes to All the Things You Are, or Perdido. That's how we got over. And the club owner would walk and say, now that's much better. That's what I'm talking about. He never knew the difference as long as the drummer, kept the backbeat going.
Yeah.
But like I said, we were drugged because we said, man, we got to play these blues. But now, some 30, 40, 50 years later, we realized what a blessing in disguise it was because everybody can't play the blues. Charles Mingus said, I want to write like Duke Ellington and play the blues. The great Dizzy Gillespie, the co-progenitor of this music, said, the difference between me and Bird is that Bird could play the blues and I couldn't. And that's what Dizzy said on videotape, which we knew that. I mean, everybody can't play. It's something that you can't teach. That's the phenomenal thing about Eric Alexander, as he was saying earlier. There are benefits on all jobs. He learned how to play the blues by being with Charles Earling and association. And that's how that came about. We never talked about that in William Powers. Eric, I'm going to teach how to play because I can. Because if I could teach somebody how to play the blues, I would have gone to Gene Harris and said, hey, Gene, because he could play the blues.
Uh-huh.
You see.
Well, let me ask you about this Memphis, the clubs. How old were you when you started doing that?
About 15 and a half or 16 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
How'd your parents feel about you playing in these dance clubs?
Well, they didn't have a problem one way or the other. I guess they were just happy to see me try and pursue something rather than being in the streets, even though the streets then is nothing like being in the streets now as far as what the young kids were doing. The things they do now, we didn't even think about doing stuff like that. So they were always supportive of me because, like I say, they loved the blues. And we went to church. I had to go to church all the time, 2 or 3 times on a Sunday, But they always, supported me because even though my mother was around, she and my father had separated for a while. So I was raised up with my father, my aunt, my grandmother. But I still had a chance to be with my mother during that time,
But you had this interest in bebop, and where did that come from at that age? Was it the radio or buying LPs?
No, see, that's the thing. On the radio, you didn't hear no. First of all, on the radio, you would hear, say, maybe some Dave Brubeck, some George Shearing, but you didn't really hear no Art Tatum, Charlie Parker, Bud Powell, because that was too strong for the airwaves. So even then, the artists who played that way had to play in a more commercial type vein. But we always had big bands that would come to Memphis, Tennessee, like the Count Basie Big Band, or the Duke Ellington Big Band, or the Lyon Hampton Orchestra, and he would play it at the Palace Theater, and on that group would be like a big band, a jazz vocalist, maybe Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, something like that, and a comedian. and that would be it. So we had a chance to hear it that way. Otherwise, we would just, some of the guys were hip enough to have had the records by Bud Powell and Charlie Parker, and we would go by their houses and listen. That's how we got exposed to. But strange enough, George Coleman and Louis Smith and Phineas Newborn, they were already hip to Charlie Parker, the hard edge, hardcore bebop, if you will. You know.
I see. Were the clubs segregated at that time?
Yeah, the clubs were segregated at the time, but there are a couple of artists would be able to come in and sit in the back. But for the most part, all the clubs were segregated, yeah.
And this would have been around
1950, 51, 52, and on.
Yeah.
Up. Yeah.
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 So your repertoire of blues would include tunes like the Hucklebuck,
The Hucklebuck,
Night Train, and stuff
Night
like that.
Train, the Boogie Woogie, a lot of slow blues with the vocalist singing and stuff like that. You know,
What were the pianos like that you got to play on?
very bad. I mean, really bad. And see, you know, I tend to think that probably most of the great piano players are the ones who came up. Art Tatum played on bad pianos. Phineas Newborn Jr. had two pianos. Both of them were bad. So there were no Steinways during that transfer. As a matter of fact, they were all uprights. Very bad, keys missing, the ivory jagged. So if you're not careful, you cut your finger. Oh, there was some bad time.
Mm-hmm.
But we had to deal with what we had. And a lot of times the pianos would be so out of tune. That's how I think I learned how to transpose. I'd have to do crossover. I'd have to play in one key while they played another to match the sound. You
I'll
know?
be darned.
So I think that's
Yeah.
how I began to learn how to transpose, because I had to do that then. You know?
Wow, almost like a guitar had a capo on it or something.
Right.
You
What they call a bar. You slide that bar down,
Yeah.
yeah, that kind of thing, yeah.
That's interesting. So was there any mixing between the white and the black musicians at this time?
Very, very little. Yeah. I really can't call any incidents, no, like I said, because it was total segregation. But what we would do, we could go to places like West Memphis, Arkansas, which was like across the bridge from Memphis, and we would play in the white-owned clubs for the white audience, but it was totally segregated, you know. Yeah.
Interesting. Why? You said something about going to Chicago because you thought you were going to get into
Right.
the
See, when I
university.
graduated, Frank Stroge and I graduated from high school in 1954. So my sister and my brother-in-law and my mother were living in Chicago at the time. So she said, well, you come here, and we try to send you to the Chicago Conservatory of Music. Because I had about 3 or 4 scholarships, one to Tennessee State, Arkansas State, Jackson College, some other place. But I turned them down because I wanted to be able to get to Chicago, where it was a larger city and a better environment, musically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got there, the money situation was not what it could have been. So my sister said, well, look, we can't afford the college, but since you're here, just stay here and see what you can do, which is what I did. I stayed there and hung out in the streets of Chicago, went to all the clubs, made the rounds, and made all the jam sessions. And as I said, the rest is history, you know.
Did you have music scholarships to these places?
Yeah, I had music scholarship.
And you
See,
said-
I played in the high school band. I played baritone horn in the high school band. I played the marches, Colonel Bogan marches, Washington Post, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I had a scholarship based on that. And at that time, I was playing very little piano because I couldn't, but most of it was because of my so-called expertise in the marching band.
Okay. But your piano playing was and is mostly self-taught.
All self-taught. All self-taught. As a matter of fact, I went to Chicago Conservatory, and I went down, and I took a couple of lessons, but what it was a case where I was memorizing the music. You probably heard this before from different people. It was like I was memorizing the music quicker than I could, you know, like I'd look at it and say the Happy Farmer. So it's like I'd look at it and kind of pick it out. But then the next lesson, it was like I had it memorized. You know, I've heard about other people, you know, but as far as formal training, you know, I never really had it. You know.
So when you were presented with let's say someone that you were listening to were playing some kind of chord and you go, oh man, what is that?
Right.
How do you go about finding out what that is?
Well,
Just
before I left the band director and then George Coleman, since George Coleman knows a lot about chords, they would show me. I knew after I started playing in Memphis, I began to understand, oh, well, this is a G minor to a C7, like that. So I was kind of getting a little handle of it then. And then I could read a thick book called The Warren's Black Chord Book, it was about that wide and that high, and all it had in there was say body and soul would have E flat. Now you had to figure out E flat minor, E flat major, E flat what, but no melody notes or nothing. So we used that for certain little tunes. But then once I got to Chicago, that's when my ear training kind of really opened, and I really started to get down with the chords and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I never did really have a problem reading the chord changes once I saw what it was, but formal training, I didn't have any of that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the environment in Chicago was so healthy and so vast, because here in Memphis, you'd have maybe 1 or 2 great piano players, but in Chicago, you might have 5 or 6 on every corner that could play,
Uh-huh.
because the city was a larger city, naturally,
Did you do any of the blues gigs on the South Side, or was that not something you pursued?
No, what strange enough, I worked a lot in the big band on the South Side with Morris Ellis Big Band. He was a wonderful trombonist that went to school, went to Howard University with Benny Golson and Eddie Jones, who used to play with bass up, Count Basie's bad bass player,
Yeah.
And so that's how I got my little bit of, big band training, by playing in the big band. And the charts were kind of, for somebody self-taught, they weren't really too easy. So, but I was able to hang in there and get the experience that I needed. And after that, when I moved to New York, I was able to get right in line Hampton's band. So that the experience I had in Chicago was good for me to play the music in Hampton's band, because I've been reading music, in the big band in Chicago.
Yeah. What was the pay scale back in Chicago in those days? What kind of money would you make on a gig?
Well, if you made $45 on a weekend, that was a lot of money. And if you made a gig like a private party where you made $75 to $100, oh man, that was fantastic. But I would say basic pay would be something like $45 per night.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would do, I'd get that $45 and go straight to Citibank, if I must say it, not that I'm pushing them, and put it in. And I saved up, so when it was time for me to make my move to New York City, I had the money already saved up. So,
Wow, that's thinking ahead.
yeah.
But New York was like, okay, we have to go there.
You got to go, because you go to places, even Chicago, and you got to know when to make your move. And after you say, well, we've done everything we can do here, it's time to make the move to the Big Apple. Now, see, New York City, you never make the move, because you never master everything that's to be done. And even now, just the city itself. But no matter what town you're in, you can be in L.A., Memphis, or Chattanooga, whatever. There comes a time when you say, well, we've gone as far as we can go, because we had a good group in Chicago called the MJT Plus 3, young people. Frank Strozier, Bob Crenshaw, Walter Perkins, myself, Bobby Bryant, And we were very successful during that time. There were 3 groups that had hit records. Ahmad Jamal's trio, Ramsey Lewis trio, and our group, But after the work kind of subsided, we said, okay, it's time to make the move to New York, which is what we did, because when we went to New York, we had work lined up. We didn't go there just to be checking. We already had at least 6 to 8 weeks work lined up.
You talk about that
and around the New York area.
Talking about the
MJT Plus 3.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Did that require that you have some kind of agent or something? That you
Well, believe it or not, we had some kind of little agent. Sarah Barnes, one of Sarah Barnes' husbands, he was kind of managing us. That's what, more of a manager than an agent. I guess, guess it's one and the same,
Right. Well, what was New York like for you the first time that you got there?
Overwhelming. I couldn't believe it, even though I had read about it and seen pictures, but I couldn't believe that I was actually here, really, for all intents and purposes, by myself, But even George Coleman was there in Booker Little, because at that time, they were working with Max Roach's group, But as far as family members, I was on my own. And I felt at that point, I was mature enough to know how to handle it and everything, and know how to manage whatever little money I had and not go through it. And the thing was, we wanted to be in New York at least 6 months, which was the requirement that you'd have to be there to get your union card. So before you could get your union card, you would be considered like a traveling musician, even though you're in New York. And when the union man comes around, you'd have to have like a special paper say, well, I'm a traveling musician, and I'm trying to establish residency here so I can eventually get my union card, which is what I finally did,
You could still play?
You could still play,
Until you got the card.
Until you got the card.
Yeah. The union was pretty strong back then, wasn't
Oh,
it?
yeah. They would come around and check your union cards. It's not quite like that now, but during that time, oh yeah, man, they would come out, okay, young man, let me see your union card. Now, if you come and tell me I don't have one or something, what do you mean you don't have, you know what I mean? Oh yeah, they were very, you know. I don't think they do that as much now as they used to, you know. And then they said, well, we want you at the union hall Monday morning at 8 o'clock. You'd have to come and explain why you didn't have a union card. You know.
Wow. And when you finally were able to get in, did you have to do any auditioning for them?
Not really. The only requirement was that, okay, you want to join the union, you have proof, you've been here 6 months or whatever it is. Now you got to have the amount of money it takes to join the union, which was maybe during that time, I don't know, it might have been $50, $75, or $100, which was a lot of money during that time. Now I'm sure it's much, much more.
Yeah.
And the requirements are stronger. I don't think you have to do an audition, but there are certain things that are stronger, you know.
So you start to get established, and what was the Lionel Hampton gig like for you?
Very interesting.
Yeah.
What happened, I got to New York, and as I was telling a couple of students today, they wanted to know how do I motivate myself and get ahead. I said, go to all the jam sessions. Even if it's not a jam session, if you go to hear somebody play and you feel it's a chance you can play, try to do that. So Lionel Hampton was working at a place called the Metropole Lounge on 7th Avenue around 47th, 48th Street. And he wasn't using a guitar, he wasn't using a piano player, even though they had a piano player, he was using guitar. Bill Maker was playing guitar.
Who was that?
So one of my dearest friends from Chicago named John Miller, rest his soul, he said, why don't you come by and sit in with Gates? We call it, Lionel Hampton called it, hey Gates, come on Gates, you know. So I went by and he introduced me to it, and the Metropole was like a long bar. It was long, and the band was spread out. You know, it wasn't too wide, just long. So John Neal introduced me, said, hey, this is Harold Mabel, playing for Chicago. Can he say, yeah, Gates, you want to play something? So I got up there, and naturally I knew flying home from the get-go. And because I had been reading music in the big band in Chicago, my eyes were kind of up. And Hampton's music wasn't that extreme. It was mostly chords, not a lot of notes, maybe a little passage here. So I sat in, and he said, yeah, Gates, I like it. He said, yeah, Gates, you want to go to Argentina with me? I said, yeah, you know. No, I didn't even have to, I don't even know if I had a passport then. So he said, okay, Gates, you got to come down here Thursday, and the doctor begin to give you a vaccination for the, you know, and go down and get your passport. During that time, you could go to the passport office on at the Rockefeller Center, you know, like 49th and 49th and what was it? 49th, 5th Avenue. So I got my passport. Now, one of Hamp's agents, he was booked by Joe Glazer. And the tickets were already bought for the plane flight. So I think some kind of way I took somebody else's seat. I don't know who, you know. He said, yeah, Gates. So I got there, got my vaccination on that Thursday. That Friday, I was on my way to Buenos Aires, Argentina. And that's how that happened. So I stayed with the band for a whole year, you know, because like I said, but at some point I was getting a little tired because I wanted to really play. I said, here, I'm in New York. I said, the big band is one thing, but I'm not getting that many solos. Then when I would get a solo, Hamp would come and start playing two fingers at the top. So now I'm getting a little tired of this. So we got back, we did about 6-week tour and all through Europe, everywhere, all one-nighters. Oh man, all one-nighters, you know. And what we would do here again, even over there, we would find a place to go jam. We would call them, they call them hot clubs. And we played tours like Straight Street, John Coltrane, Straight Street, and stuff like that. And we would tell him, he said, hey, Gates, you all hanging out tonight? We would say, oh, no, we're not hanging out tonight because we know if Hamp came around, he would get up there and want to play, want to play the same songs you've been playing and come back to the two-piano thing. So when we got back to the States, I was living in the Sloan House Wife, which was good because I was only paying 0.75 cents a day. Can you imagine that?
Say that again?
0.75 cents a day.
What was the name of the place?
Sloan House YMCA, 34th Street,
gosh.
between 8th and 9th Avenue, because I had $5,000 when I got there. Now, 1959, $5,000 was probably like maybe $20,000 or $30,000 because the cost of living was down. I mean, Transcontinental Airlines from New York to Chicago, vice versa, was $24.50. The Four Seasons, the Sheraton Waldorf was like $50 a week. You go there now, the occupancy rate is $65 a night. That's aside from the $300 to $499, you know.
Yeah.
So $5,000 is a lot of money. $5,000 is a lot of money now. Somebody just say, I'm gonna give you $5,000 for a piano lesson or a half-hour gig, you know.
Yeah.
So, but I said, well, I'm gonna hold on to this, but how can I stretch it? Because we were staying in a hotel in Midtown Manhattan called the Flanders. A lot of musicians stayed there. And I think that was something like $10 to $15 a week. But that was, I said, well, no, I gotta make this money, because once this goes, if I don't preserve it and get some gigs, I'm gonna be back in Chicago, and I had no intentions of doing that. So somebody told me about the wine. I went there and I said, okay, I can handle this. Private room, you know, but you had to go to the main bathroom to take the shower and stuff. They had a lot of face bowls and stuff. It was big and roomy, but you had to pick your time to get your showers in for your privacy. So then I said, but at this point I saved my money up. I said, I want to get an apartment. So I was able to get an apartment on 130 West 73rd Street. And like a one-room kitchenette, $96 a month, which wasn't bad. Now I'm sure that same place, I go by there sometime and look at the building, I'm sure that place probably rents for $5,000 a month. Same place, same, you know. So I said, I need a phone. So I called the phone company and first said, do you have any references? I said, yeah, I play with Lionel Hampton's orchestra. They checked it out, telephone, no problem. So the gig worked that way. So now we getting ready to go to Wildwood, New Jersey. So Cedar Walton, one of my dearest friends, called. He said, Brother Mayburn, we are down here at Birdland with the Jazz Tech, you know, Art Farmer, Benny Golson, Cedar Walton, Tootie Heath, and probably Tommy Williams on bass. And he said, you might want to come and sit in, you know. And I took it on him because I was only one stop from Birdland on the subway, you know, where I live. So I went down, and Cedar introduced it to Benny Golson. With Benny Golson and Art, they kind of knew me from Chicago anyway with the MJT plus T. So I sat in, I don't know what we played, it was something kind of like here. Might have been a blues, but I started playing. See, I've always loved to comp. That's my passion. You know, I tell people I'm more concerned about being a great comper than a great soloist, because if I comp good, then I feel I have a chance to get more jobs. So I start comping, and I look up and I see Benny Golson smiling, you know. And, you know, Art Farmer never did show much emotion. He had his horn out here. And Tommy McIntosh, yeah, he was smiling. So when he got through playing, and Benny Golson said, yeah, Mayburn, man, yeah, wow, whatever. And Art Farmer said, hey, man, Benny and I, we getting ready to, you know, because they were very happy, because Cedar Walton was getting ready to leave to go with Art Blake and the Jazz Messengers. Cedar Walton, Reggie Workman, Freddie Hubbard, Curtis Fuller, that group. See, that's the thing in New York even then. Gigs were turning over. And if you happen to be in the right place, you could get a gig. If you could halfway play, cats want to sing it. And if you could halfway play and swing, and I was always a good comper, pretty good comper, and whatever little solo I played, it swung, because I listened a lot to Wynton Kelly, one of my heroes, you know. So I sat in, so I told him, hey, man, we're getting ready to make a change, and we got somebody kind of, but if we hear anything, we'll let you know. I said, okay, I'm going on back home to my apartment, because I'm going to Wildwood, New Jersey the next morning. So around 8 o'clock in the morning, the telephone rang. I said, hello? I said, yeah, this is Art Farmer. And I said, yeah, I'm thinking, why is he calling me? He said that Benny and I talked it over, and we want you to join the band. Just on the way I was comping. I'm not bragging, but that's just all it was, the way I was comping and supporting them. So I said, well, how do you want me to play? And so Art said, just the way you did last night. So this time, you know, Benny Golson writes hard music. It's certain people that write music that write hard with the purpose. Thad Jones, Frank Foster, Benny Golson, Slide Hamp, you know, certain ones, if I got to play some of that music, get it to me 10 weeks ahead of time, you know. So I told Art, I said, well, you all playing all those hard piano parts. So Benny said, don't worry, Mayburn, we kind of getting away from that, you know. Because this time, this would have been the third Jazz Tech. The original was McCoy Town, then Cedar. Now I'm coming in, that's the third Jazz Tech. So sure enough, they cut back on some, but I still had certain kind of music to read. So then I got in the band, so Lionel Hampton said, Gates, I can take you to court, I'm going to sue you. I told you to stay with me, I was going to make you big as bubblegum. That was his thing, you know. But we kind of worked it out, you know, because by rights, you're supposed to give a 2 weeks notice. I think I gave a 5-day notice. Because
Right.
I said at this point, I cannot miss this gig. I mean, this is a chance to really get out in the forefront. A band from New York, be on the scene. You know what I mean? Too good to be true. You know.
Sure.
So, but we worked it out, and he wished me well because at one point in time, Billy Golson and Art Farmer had both been in his band. Aside from Art Blakey, Lionel Hampton had more all-stars in his band than anybody that ever had. Clifford Brown, G.G. Grice, Quincy Jones playing trumpet, Art Farmer, Alan Dawson, Johnny Griffin,
Dexter Gordon.
Dexter, you name it. You know what I mean? So
Even Joe Wilder played with him.
You know, hey, man, everybody went through that. George Coleman was in that for a minute.
Well,
You know?
wasn't that band, maybe not at the time, but considered to be sort of like a stopping point?
Yeah.
I'll be here for a while. And
For a while, right.
Because he didn't pay great, did
He
he?
didn't pay that. Well, he didn't pay that, but let's face it though, but he paid what was the going rate during that time, because I remember I used to have to, they give you the money in this envelope and they have on a deduction. It was $165 a week.
A week.
But after the $165, I was able to save $100. You see what I'm saying? So that still was a lot of money. If I can save $100 a week, hey man, you kidding? So I take that 65 and stretch it and pay my little phone bill. Maybe my phone bill might have been what, $10 or $15 a month. You know what I'm saying? So that was the going rate, $165.
Yeah. And you were you still single at the
I was
time?
still single at the
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So then when I got with the Jazz Tech, that was it. As a matter of fact, there's a book out now that was put out by the Baroness Rothschild called Musicians. It's called Three Wishes, and she would go around and with her camera and ask the musicians if they had 3 wishes, what would that be? I come to find out that I'm in the book. I've never had no idea. I don't even recall hearing anybody talking to me because, see, here again, I would go to hit the Lonely Smoke, and I would sit at the table with the Baroness, but I was well reserved, and I knew how to keep my mouth shut and not speak until I was spoken to. And see, even then, the older people, the musicians liked me because I wasn't one to run my mouth like I do today. I would listen, and when they spoke to me, you know. So I said, you can't. Michael White said, yeah, maybe you're in that book. There's 2 beautiful pieces, one with me and Charlie Rouse, and one with me and Teddy Wilson, another one of my heroes, you know. Then shortly after that, we went to the Atlanta Jazz Festival, and we left there and probably went to Chicago, and that's where I met my wife when I was with the Jazz Tech. And I used to say, Billy Golson, then I thought about it, I said, no, Billy Golson's not responsible. He's responsible for hiring me, but it was Cedar Walton that made it possible for me to sit in. So I said, Cedar, I've been with my wife almost 50 years, mainly because of you. He said, Brother Maywood, I didn't know that, you know.
Yeah.
So that's how, and then I stayed with the band until it disbanded. I was with the band. We did 2 records together with the band, and I did one beautiful quartet day with Art Farmer called Perception with Roy McCurdy, Tommy Williams, and myself. A beautiful day, you know. And like I always told Stanley Cowell, he likes this. I said, well, on any kind of job, don't leave the job, let the job leave you. That's my philosophy. As long as the job is going, don't leave the job. Why should I go looking for something that already, you know what I mean? So I never quit a job. I stayed until it was over. Then I moved on to the next one.
Right. Would that band have gone under the heading of hard bop?
Yeah, I would say so, because we were playing a cross thing, because, you know, Billy did a lot of writing of his own. And to this day, Billy Golson has never written a weak composition. Every composition that he has written is strong. Stablemate, strong, challenging. Along Came Benny, strong. Whisper Not, beautiful. I Remember Clifford, beautiful. Most guys don't play that out because a lot of guys don't know how to play just the melody because they don't know the difference between the melody of the first and the second. I mean, it's very deceptive because Billy Golson's a true genius, you know, that when he writes a composition, it's a composition. It's not a song. It's a composition that's been thoroughly worked out and you know what I mean, and creatively sound, you know.
Did you guys kind of have a separate path from the rock and roll in the pop music that was played on AM radio at the time? In other words, did you listen to the music that was getting all the airplay, Chuck Berry and those guys? Did it affect you at all?
If it was good music, yeah. And to this day, I still do that because, see, I always tell people that somebody asked me a question. I said, well, I consider myself a blues piano player that understands the philosophy of jazz. So I told Frank, he said, you said that, Frank said? I said, yeah. He said, man, I like that. That's what I am. I'm going to always be, because blues, jazz comes from the blues. Because here again, like I said, not to be redundant, there are a lot of jazz musicians who can swing, who can play jazz, but they can't play the blues. You can't teach that. It's by nature or just being or whatever. So that's the way I feel. I mean, if I had a choice to play Raking and Scraping, one of my compositions, or something else in there, I'm going to take the blues, because with me, the blues, I am the blues. Somebody else might say, but I am the blues. That's me. I'll never forget, I was working at the Hampton with Joe Williams, rest his soul, and Jimmy Witherspoon came down to see us. And the first said, we were having a great time playing. So Spoon said, hey, Joe, let me hear some blues. So Joe Williams said, well, Spoon, it's too early for the blues. Spoon said, Joe, it ain't never too early for the blues. It's right. If you play with Emil Jackson, you better not play the blues. That's what I said. Charles Mingus said, I wish I could write like Duke Ellington and play the blues. So I've always been attracted to the blues, even to this day, or anything that's bluesy. Ahmad Jamal played with George Hudson's blues band. That's why if you listen to a lot of Ahmad's compositions, they got that bluesy feeling to it. Clifford Brown played with Chris Powell in the Blue Flame blues band, Richard Powell. Bill Harvey played Tiny Bradshaw, Jimmy, so most of those, Stanley Turrentine, Coltrane, played with Earl Bostic's rhythm and blues band. Now you got Louis Jordan in the Temple of Fire. George Coleman, Jamil Nasser played with B.B. King's blues band, rhythm and blues. George Coleman took the first alto solo on Woke Up This Morning, My Baby's Girl, that was a hit. You see, so we all came up through the blues. So when I listen to the radio now or whatever, anything that's bluesy or melodious, I don't listen to everything, because most of that stuff is not worth it, because the minute you hear it, you say, well, that's not my cup of tea. You can tell there's nothing happening, But like, I was going to Denver one time, and I'm on American Airlines. I'm going to Denver for 8 weeks by myself. Cold. I'm going to be like the house band. And you know how you listen to the headphones on the airplane, and I hear da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I said, man, that's so beautiful. That turned out to be Bobby Caldwell, What You Won't Do for Love, which to this day is a big hit all over Japan. So I'm always attracted to anything that's bluesy. Earth, Wind and Fire, Shaka Khan, whoever it is. If it's bluesy, I didn't listen a lot to Chuck Berry like intentionally, but blues. Margaret Miller and I were talking about a Little Milton Campbell. They talk about BB. BB is great, but Little Milton Campbell had some stuff with him. He was from Greenwood, Mississippi, where Margaret Miller's from. Little Milton Campbell, he would sing If Walls Could Talk and Poor Man Blues, you see. And see, in Chicago, you had to play the blues. It's not like New York City. You go to the south side of Chicago, the west side, you had to know how to play some blues. And you had to know how to play for singers. And see, those are the two foundations. So when I got to Chicago, it was no big deal, because I already knew kind of how to play blues from being in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, once I get with the singers, then that becomes my accompanying skill. And those are the two things that I think that has helped me as much as it can help me, is being able to play the blues, being able to swing, knowing chord changes, know how to transpose, and know how to play for singers.
And how do you play for singers?
Well, the thing is, you got to know how to follow them, not lead. And one of the main things you do for singers, because most of them sing the Great American Songbook. I hate to keep saying it, but the Great American Songbook is the way of life. As I said before, if Art Tatum and Charlie Parker played it, who are we not to? They could have been played. Bird never wrote in it. Bird wrote a couple of blues songs, and really, most of everything that Charlie Parker played was You and the Night of Music and The Still of the Night Dancing, April in Paris. Bird played standard. Art Tatum played standard. Keith Jarrett's playing standard. Case closed. You see, so to play for singers, the one thing I tell piano players, the one thing you don't do, if you're playing for a singer and the singer's singing da 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 da, if a singer's singing on this, I think that's the sixth, major sixth, will I ever find Savon? You don't voice the chord. You always try to voice the chord with the leading tone not being in the top part of the voice. Because if you're doing that, then you're no longer covering. If you're playing the leading tone that she's singing, you orchestrate the way Nelson Riddle did with Frank Sinatra. See, I think of myself as an orchestra, because the piano is an orchestra. I play little embellishment. That's how you play for a singer. Now, some singers, Joe Williams loved the singer line, like Count Basie, a note here and there, space. Ella Fitzgerald might like you to run, oh, the child, big band shout. Sarah Vaughan might like a combination of both, you see? So you have to know how to do it with all of them. You do this by listening to them. So if you get a call for the gig already, you know when to hold, when to fold. So it's really not as hard to sing. Then when you get an opening, then you do your arpeggios or you do your big chord thing or whatever. And that's the thing. See, that was a beautiful thing playing for Joe Williams, because anything I do, he could follow me. I could never throw him off, not that because he could hear. You wouldn't throw him off. And then he'd sing behind the beat, and I have to go straight ahead. I couldn't wait for, because if I wait for him to we're going to be wrong. Just follow the swallow. Keep doing what you're doing. I'll meet you at the end, you see. So that's really, but I tell the people, young people, piano players, some of the greatest piano players I know are the ones that played for singers, like Tommy Flanagan, like Hank Jones, like Oscar Peterson. Oscar Peterson with Billie Holiday, great accompaniment. Oh yeah, like Ellis Watkins, like my hometown, who Hank Jones says is probably number one, Jimmy Jones, who did orchestration for Duke, who played on that famous record with Sarah Vaughan with Clifford Brown, Joe Benjamin, Paul Quinichette, and Herbie Mann. That's Jimmy Jones with those lush, beautiful chords. And see, I've always been attracted to chords. I love chords, Excuse me. Plus, I did a lot of listening to George Shearing, who's one of my heroes. That's why I said, harmonica speaking, the people talk about Bill Evans, not to take nothing from Bill, but I've always been more involved with George Shearing's harmonic gestures, And then there's a blind pianist who passed away named Chris Anderson from Chicago, who was Charlie Parker's favorite piano player, who taught him in the Hancock. But see, it's not known because nobody really talks about it. I'm just here to tell you the truth. As a matter of fact, I was told that Bill Evans used to come and check out Chris Anderson, which he did because he was totally unique. He was a harmonic genius.
What was his name?
Chris Anderson.
Okay.
A-N-D-R. He studied, Herbert Hancock studied with him.
Oh.
Harmonic genius. And he came up with Bill Lee, who was another genius. Bill Lee, who was Spike Lee's father. That's where I have to put it. No people know about Bill Lee too much, but Spike Lee's father, harmonic genius. He was the one that taught me how to play music, because when I heard him play in Chicago, he was playing these chords. I said, wow, man, what kind of stuff is that? Now, mind you, I just got away from Phillies playing, the two hands and swinging, the orchestra, which is good, but when I heard these, I call them harmonic gestures, I said, man, I've never heard no stuff like that. Well, see, in Chicago, all piano players had their own harmonic devices. That's why, and believe it or not, it's still the most underrated city when it comes to musicians in jazz, if you can believe this. Yeah, very underrated. When the people said, what about the Memphis musicians? I said, well, we don't even count. They said, wait a minute, what are you talking about all that? I said, we're non-existent. And it's the truth. But the musicians, all the piano players in Chicago had certain harmonic devices. When I used to go to Richard Buhall Abrams' house, he had certain way, he was playing straight ahead like Bud Powell. He later counted, you know what I'm saying? But everybody had a harmonic concept. Floyd Morris, Ronnie Bright, who was Nancy Wilson's accompanist. All the piano players could play. There was a legendary pianist there named Sonny Thompson, who was like Willie Booth. He could sit down and play like Art Tatum. You see what I'm saying? So that's how I learned. So when I heard Bill Lee playing all these beautiful harmonics, I said, man, I got to find out what that is, So it took me 2 weeks before he would open up to me. He showed me, talked to me about what he was doing. And he told me about Chris Sampson, Billy Wallace. Then naturally, Mr. Ahmad Jamal was holding court at the Persian Lounge, another harmonic genius, a true musical genius. I mean, everybody knows how I feel about Ahmad and Phineas, that those are my two favorite piano players, bar none, and they don't have a problem with it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But back to about the singing, that's how you play for singers. You have to listen and let them sing, and you become the orchestra. And see, we used to listen to Nelson Riddle, Frank Sinatra, the wee small hours of the morning. And when you listen to it, you hear that was a match made in heaven. The way Frank would sing and Nelson with those orchestrations, with those strings and the violin and muted trumpets with the flutes and the French horn, oh man, nothing greater. And that's how, and then when Herbert and I used to get together, there was a great arranged orchestra. They said probably the greatest orchestrator ever lived. His name is Robert Farnham. And he did some dates with J.J. He did a date with Joe Williams, Years to Life. He was, and Herbert had records by him called the Crossfire, the Candles. And Herbert and I used to listen to all those kind of things. And me being dumb, I made a mistake and said, oh, by the way, Herbert, I still got your two Robert Farnham records. Yeah, man, give me my record. I should have kept my mouth shut. So, but like I said, Chicago was a harmonic town. You had singers like Lorraine Alexandra, Lurleen Hunter, one of the greatest singers that Carmen McRae was in awe of. I think she's related to Cloud Terry. Terry Thornton, who played piano and sang. She got the, I think, the National Endowment one year,
Right.
and a couple years later she was gone. So
Yeah.
Chicago was a great city for that because you had to know how to play for singers, you had to know how to transpose, you had to play on all the keys, you had to play balance. I played with Gene Almond. You had to know how to play real slow. I played with Betty Carter. I did a thing with her called Inside Betty Carter, one of the greatest records she's ever made. They didn't put the personnel on it, but it's Roy McCurdy, Bob Crenshaw, and yours truly. We rehearsed 12 hours a day for that day. It's called Inside Betty Carter. I think they put it out on CD. So that's always been my thing, you know. And when I got to New York, and like I said, Hank Jones was scoping me out, and I didn't even know it. And I played with all the singers at Berlin. Now, don't ask me how it happened. I don't know. Maybe I played with one and word got around. And I'd be working opposite Coltrane. I played with Johnny Hartman way before McCoy and Train. Johnny Hartman would leave home without me. I played with Arthur Price-Star, and I had to take off, and I had Herbie Hancock to play Saturday night. And Cedar Walton was there to confirm it. I had all the singers. I played with Ernestine Anderson, Etta James, Gloria Lynn. I mean, we played Watermelon Man A-flat. I played with, like I said, Johnny Hartman. I played with Irene Reed. I had all the singing gigs at Berlin, so consequently, I was always on the scene. So it'd be 3 bands: John Coltrane Quartet, Betty Carter Trio with Harold Mabon and Ron Carter and Ron McCurdy, or Bill Lee and Ron McCurdy. Then I take a break, then the Horace Silver's Quintet. So that went
Good
on
Lord.
for years, you know. So that kind of really tightened up my accompanying skills because I had, you know, expertise in playing for singers.
Yeah.
And know how to treat this singer differently from that. If this singer was behind the beat and I felt I need to pull her up, I'd do something to enhance the beat. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know,
And you learned a lot of different keys too, I would imagine.
you have to play in all the keys.
Yeah.
Especially with the female singers, because say, for example, if they sing in Lush Life, they're not singing B flat, it's too low. They're going to be singing maybe the key of E, A, or B. So you got to really learn how to transpose. Oh, yeah, you have to play in all the keys. You know.
Well, I want to play something for you. I noticed the last couple of days you've got quite a musical memory for
Right.
some of the things you've done. I tried to fool you, or I tried to see if you could recognize something you did with Lee Morgan, and you got it right off. But this particular thing, I don't think you'll... First of all, does it sound like somebody you know?
Sounds very, I think you got me this time. It sounds very familiar. It almost sounds like me.
It is you.
But I'm trying to,
It's not something that was ever on a record.
that's
So
what I'm wondering about. That's what, yeah. What is that? Oh, that's Joe Williams.
yes.
That's Joe, yeah. Yeah, I knew it sounded like me, but I didn't recognize. I said, I don't recall recording that
Right.
on a record.
Well, this is you and Joe in about 1967 from the Rainbow Room
It's the Rainbow Room
in New York
New
City.
York City.
And the reason I have this is that Joe apparently had someone record it.
Right.
And Jillian gave us all these tapes.
Right.
And so this is
Look at that
This
thing,
is
the
like
Rainbow Room. we were probably up there for maybe sometimes we'd be up there maybe 3 or 4 or 5 weeks at a time.
Yeah.
And Duke Ellington would come by, because Joe loved Duke.
Yeah.
You know, Duke, I was sing with the maestro, and I'd tell him, go ahead and play something. He played. Jimmy Jones would come back, because Joe loved Jimmy Jones. And he'd always tell me, he would say, you know, not necessarily play like Jimmy Jones, but listen, which I had no problem with that, because Jimmy Jones and Jerome Richardson were the ones that recommended me for the job with Joe, you know. But yeah, isn't that something?
Yeah.
I think one time we played up there, Big Nick was the guest on.
That's who the guy.
And Joe Newman one. Yeah.
He's on this recording.
Yeah, isn't that something?
Yeah.
I knew it sounded like me, but I didn't recall recording anything record-wise. That's why I had to listen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to find a record company who'd be willing to
That sure would be good.
put something like that out.
Yeah.
You know, I think Hugh Walker played on it.
Hugh Walker, yeah, that's
And-
his soul.
Yeah. So that's pretty neat that
Yeah,
you're
it's
here, and I'm,
awesome.
yeah.
Hugh Walker's one of those kind of drummers like he carried his own rhythm, had his rhythm in his hip pocket. I mean, he could, the minute he sat down, he was on one of my favorite record dates, Reagan and Scraping. Hugh Walker is on that. Hugh Walker, George Coleman, Lou Mitchell, and Bill Lee. Yeah, Hugh
Wow.
Walker.
Was there a period of, was there any particular period of time, a decade or whatever, that it got harder to make a living
Oh,
in
yeah.
the jazz world? What was that for you?
Oh, well, I can tell you precisely. I think, let me see now. It could have been around maybe close to 6 to 8, 6 to 7, 6 to 8. Things were getting a little tight, so I was always saying, well, there's no point in me waiting for the phone to ring. So I
Okay, so you were
around 6 to 7, 6 to 8, things were a little tight. And they had this store, Alexander's Department Store. So I said, well, let me see what I can find. Now, mind you, playing music all my life, I had no expertise in anything else. I didn't have a college degree. I didn't know anything, auto mechanics, woodwork, no other skills. So I went to Alexander's Department Store and got the job. And had my shirt in town. I guess they called me an expediter or whatever that meant. And may I help you? How may I help you? And I worked that job, punched my clock, I'm a little pay home, wasn't a lot of money. And the minute that happened, that's when the phone rang with Lee Morgan. Said, hey man, I got this gig, what you know. So anytime things got a little tight, and I go get a day job, then a jazz job would come through. So then I got the job with Lee. And I think before that, maybe I worked at a place called Fleet Messenger Service. I think my pay was after taxes, $36. Can you believe that? After taxes.
36
$36
a week?
after taxes. And this is before the bikes came in. I was messenger. I was taking it somewhere walking. Package for such and such, package, you know. Then my big job came after that. I worked at Wall Street Journal. I had 2 bags of newspapers. I get there at 6 o'clock in the morning, pack up a bag. So I was walking one day, I had 2 bags. I was going to the Pan Am building. And that was my last drop-off. So that's why I love going there, because I could just drop 300 papers. So I'm walking around and I see the judge, Milt Hinton, with his pushing his upright bass with the electric bass. Because you knew during that time, Milt Hinton, Richard Davis, all those people, they were on first call, George Vivier. So he was shocked. He said, Judge, what's happening? What are you doing? I said, well, Judge, I'm trying to take care of my family. So he didn't say, well, give me your number. I got something for you. He said, well, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. And I didn't take it in. I said, and I kept stepping. Then I kind of quit that job and started doing some other things. But then, before he passed, Mona, his lovely wife, rest her soul, she told me, she said, you know, I want to tell you something. That Milton always respected you, because Milt Hinton went to the same high school my wife went to, Wendell Phillips. Nat Cole went there. Ruth Jones is down in Washington. She went there. Wendell Phillips. My wife went there. Lou Rawls, Sam Cook. They all went to Wendell Phillips High School. But she told me, Mona Hinton said, you know, Milton always respected you and loved your friends. And she said he told her that when he saw you that day, delivering, you know, he gained more respect. I said, well, I appreciate it, but I'm just doing what I had to do. I don't deserve no brownie points for that. So that's how that happened. So been a lot of musicians. I think McCoy Tanner drove a cab for a while. Been a lot of me. Ahmad Jamal had day jobs, even though he was working in Chicago. He was talking about it. Ahmad Jamal, he worked at Carson's Period. Scott, Israel Crummins was a mailman. Israel Crummins would come in on the morning. We had breakfast parties and play with us, me and Frank Strozer, and go finish his life. Bernie Fournier had a job at Sears. Ernest Outlaw worked at the post office. Bob Crenshaw was a sanitation man. Hello. And he wouldn't mind me saying it because it's the truth. He said, that's right. So everybody had some kind of day job, but the difference was they had a day job, but they would still had a music job at night. Me, I had to resort to because I didn't have a music job. But whenever I took a day job, then the music gigs would come in, so to speak. You know what I mean?
How interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tatum had to work, I think, worked at the library. He would play his gig. The gig was just a means to the end, but the real music would come to the after night sessions. He would go for the sessions. I wasn't here, but this is what I was told. He would go for the sessions at Lucky Roberts' place and jam all night where they would cut heads and after the baddest cat play last. And then he would leave, go take a shower, whatever, and go and do his regular job during the day at the library or something. You know, so a whole lot of people had day jobs, you know.
Wow.
That was the way of life then, you know.
Shoot. What was the impact of the civil rights movement and then the civil rights bill in the 664 or whatever? Did it make any difference in your life?
Tell you the truth, I can't say that it did, really. The only thing it could have made a difference was maybe hotel accommodations or something. But see, I didn't really get caught up in that because the real troopers like the Diana Washington and the Harry Belafontes and people like that, they were the ones who really suffered with that, where they could work at a club in any city, but they couldn't stay at the hotel where they worked, or they had to change their clothes in the bus or something. So I really kind of avoided it, but I can't say that, you know, it enhanced my career one way or the other, you know, but I've always been down for the cause naturally. Right is right and wrong is wrong, you know. Because when I was in Memphis, Tennessee, the bus driver said, boy, get up and sit in the back of the bus. When we got on the bus, even then, and we weren't trying to be militant, we just knew that this is wrong. Here's all these seats here. I got to go to the back of the bus to maybe get a seat and stand up. So we would just sit there, and he would get up, and it was nobody. He just said, boy, and this is exactly what I said. You did say Roy, didn't you? He said, boy, get up and get in the back of the bus. And we would get up and go in the back of the bus. But every day, they would have to tell us to do it. We would just sit down. You know, like... you know, the freedom fighter lady, you know.
Right.
I must be losing. I can't.
Me too.
You know what I'm talking about. Oh boy.
I do.
But anyway, so that's the way it was. So you know, but I have great respect for all the people involved with it because all the people, all races, gave up a lot to make things better. That's why when I look at some of the young people out here acting like fools and dressing like clowns, it bothers me. That everything, and here you got a black president of the United States, you would think you would be so motivated, but they're not. It's like they're going worse. You know, it makes no sense. You know, there's been a lot of people to give up their lives to make it better for you to go to school to get a scholarship. Like we were saying, even the jazz students here, you got a chance to go to a school to learn how to play jazz. Even when I was going to high school, jazz was halfway tolerated. Oh, that's enough of that jazz. Let's play these marches. But now you can go to school to learn how to play jazz. A lot of them even take advantage of that. Makes no sense. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, you know. Oh, Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks.
Yeah. But, you know, so that's the way it is. But, you know, as things move on, you know, but I always felt, and even then, since the beginning of Louis Armstrong, because definitely he was the forerunner of this music. You got to say that. And then I tend to say, after Charlie Parker checked him out, Charlie Parker said, okay, now let me expand it. So Pops got it started. Bird better clean up and changed everything. You know what I'm saying? You know. But, you know.
Man, you've had quite a career.
Yeah, you know.
And it's active now in the education part of it at William Patterson. Added a lot for you.
Right. Yeah, it's been, you know, because this sounds like a redundant statement, but it's Ted Dunbar used to say, teaching is learning and learning is teaching. It's true. Because if you get students, especially if you got students who can already play, and you show them something, then they say, you mean do it like this? And you say, wait a minute, what was that? You know, yeah, okay. I can keep it for myself.
Yeah.
So I teach, but I also learn. Like I was saying earlier, I played the song, and I'd say, hey, Eric, this is a Travis played. One of Eric's closest friends, Travis Shook, wonderful piano player. And I was playing this song of mine, and he hit a voice and chord. So I still use that voice that he showed me, you know, all the time. You know, Coltrane was like that. Like, he played some stuff. He had a thing where he played, where later on in life he started playing to me. He was saying, like Star said, he got that from John Gilmore. Because I was at Berlin on the night when he sat in, when John Gilmore, And John Gilmore was sitting there with Pete Loper. Trey said, "Ooh, man." He said, "Hey, Pete, let John play." Because Trey like that. John Gilmore was playing it. And Trey put it in print on the next day. He said, "This is something I got from John Gilmore." I told him, John, that's the way
Nice.
Trey was. As some guy said, "Well, I got my own thing, and I got this from myself." No, you don't. Everybody got something from somebody. And then you take it and turn it around a certain way,
Mhm.
But no, the teaching here has been good for me because, like I said before, I don't consider myself a teacher. I'm an advanced student.
Ah,
That's it. Because if you get to the point where you say, "I know it all," and you're never going to grow, I want to continue to grow. I
mhm.
told Ahmed Jamal something once. I knew what he was going to say. I said, "Ahmed, you sound so good. You don't need to practice." He said, "Let me tell you something, Harold, but everybody needs to practice." And he's right. And I knew what he was going to say. I just want,
Yeah.
And if he's at home now, he's got 2 Steinway D's up there. You see, and that's why he's Ahmad Jamal, because he's not wasting any time. He's constantly improving and writing more beautiful songs, and just sounding better on that piano.
Wow. Let me run a couple names by you and just get your impression of these musicians. One is Cannonball Adderley.
Tremendous respect, love him. Tremendous talent, great musician, great man. And a thing I learned from him. Somebody asked me once, said, "Mr. Adler said, do you consider yourself a great or big man?" And Cannonball said to him, "Well, a great or big man is judged by someone other than one's self." Hey, hello. I mean, a lot of people say the same thing. Yeah, hello. See, that's another Virgo. I have tremendous respect for Cannonball Adler and his brother.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? As a musician and as a human being, well articulated.
Okay.
I heard him talking about something. Ladies and gentlemen, we have this composition here written by James Heath. You know him as Jimmy Heath, and it's called Gemini. And see, we're going to pursue to endeavor all the parts. I said, "Go ahead, Karen, with your band 7." Larry Willis got an article in this newspaper called All About Jazz, and he's talking about Cannonball was intelligent, man. I mean, he's smart, man. Plus, he made Coltrane play. If you listen to those records, Cannonball didn't back up from nobody.
Yeah.
And he was studying. One day, Jamil Nasser said, he saw Cannonball. "Hey, Cannonball." He said, "I'm sorry, man, I can't time run. I got a saxophone lesson." He was going to take a lesson with Marshall Royal.
Oh, no kidding.
That's how you get better.
Mhm.
You never stop growing. You never stop listening. You never stop learning. Like I was thinking about the trumpet players. I said, they can listen to everybody. I said, but the one trumpet player, other than, Claude, Joe Wallace, Snooky, all the trumpet players, I don't care who you are, to this day should be hanging out with John Faddis to get the Dizzy Gillespie secret. That's who they should be checking out, John Faddis. Because for me, Dizzy still, if there is a king on the trumpet, I still got to give Dizzy the edge. Sorry. That's the way I feel about it. John Birch, Hey, man,
You did a thing with Miles
Right.
in 63, was it?
63, before Herbert Hancock. Only a few people know about that.
Uh-huh.
Morgan was talking about April 1963.
Yeah.
And we had a great time, too. And see, here again, Miles knew me from Chicago with the MJT+. See, I never pursued a gig. That's never been my thing. I've never got on the phone and called up a guy and said, "Hey, man, give me a gig." That's just never been my thing. Even before I could put 2 notes together, I always felt that if you could play, if you got somebody here. So when I went out of town, I was out with Roy Haynes Quartet. Roy Haynes, Larry Ridley, Frank Stroger. So I came back. So I went upstairs. I said, "Well, let me go and get these 2 weeks I got at Berlin." "Yeah, somebody get out the car. You ain't got no 2 weeks." So I got up. My wife said, "Oh, by the way, call Betty Carter. She got 2 weeks for you at Berlin." I was just, maybe it's my ears, I don't know. So she said, "Also, do you know somebody named Prophet?" Well, Prophet, his name was Richard Jennings. He was a well-talented artist. He could draw pictures and paintings of birds. And Miles loved it. Everybody knew him. And he knew I could come. And Joan Griffin knew I could come. So I said, "What?" So I called Prophet. He said, "Yeah, call Miles." Miles getting ready to start a new band because the present band he had just broken up, which was Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, JJ, I think, at Sunny City. They were in Philadelphia. And that was the last gig. So Miles had this West Coast trip. So I called him up. I said, "Hey, Miles." I said, "This him. How you doing, man?" He knew who I was. "What's happening?" I said, "Nothing. What's going on?" "I got this little tour. I want to see if you want to make it." I said, "Well, yeah, I'd like to." So I said, "What you doing?" I said, "I'm down in Berlin with Betty Carter starting tonight." "I'll be back." I said, what's the money talking about? I knew what the going rate then, because I knew Cannonball was paying $250. That was a lot of money. I said, what's the money talking about? What you want? I said, can I get $250? You got it. But even then, before he was going to really hire me, he wanted to check me out just to be sure. And he said he had called everybody but me and another piano player, and I won't call his name out of respect. And I was next to the last on the list. I didn't have no problem with that. Hey, I don't, because during that time I wasn't thinking about working with Miles Newell. I wanted to work with Max Roach and Clifford Brown because I remember when I came to New York, Booker Little and George Coleman was working with Max, and they get ready to go to Philly, so they didn't have no piano. Ray Draper and Art Davis. So I go over to Max and started playing the piano, kind of like to let him know I knew the music. Max said, yeah, it sounds good, but ain't nothing happening here because we ain't using no piano, So Miles come down, so I told Betty Carter that her closing night would have been Miles' opening night at the Black Hawk in San Francisco. And Betty Carter said, I'm not going to let you off because if he wants you now, he can wait at night. So as it turned out, Victor Feldman did the opening night. So Miles came by to see me at Birdland, and he listened and listened. And it's mainly because of the way I come. That Prophet and Joan Rickard felt I would be good for Miles because I knew how to kind of stay out of his way. So I came off the bandstand, and he would throw a punch. And very rarely said he would throw a punch at me. That meant you were okay. That meant I like what I'm hearing. So he called me and told me where to pick up the tickets. Now, having said that, I was prepared to get to the gig, and for him to say he may have changed his mind, because it wouldn't have surprised me, because I knew during that time he had been known to maybe do that. I changed my mind, and because he did, like on the 7 Steps to Heaven. That record was conceived when I was in the band on that tour. And we had a great time. Jimmy Carver tell you about it. Ron talks about it in the book. It was me. So he asked me, he said, you know a good alto player? I said, yeah, Frank Stroger. He said, what's Frank doing? Because he knew us from Chicago. So I told Frank to go by there. Frank was reluctant. So his wife said, no, Frank, you should go. Because George Coleman was already hired. Because Coltrane recommended George Coleman for the gig. And Ron Carter was going to be in the band. Jimmy Carr was just finishing out the tour because Tony Williams was going to join the band. And we had a great 6 weeks, man. Miles made every gig. And there were times when he'd tell me if I didn't play a certain note in a certain chord, he was going to strand me, meaning like they would leave and leave me in a city by myself, But I didn't care because I always kept me some bus money or some airplane. You know what I mean? He was teasing, you know what I mean? But and he told me, you sure can swing. Well, when he said I sure can swing, that was a compliment coming behind Wynton Kelly, because couldn't nobody swing harder than Wynton Kelly. So we had a great 6 weeks. He'd get to the gig at the Shelley's Band Hall before time. Let's play some music. He was a practical guy. He was always messing with you, but he always supported me. Even after I left the band, he supported me. He heard me on the record standing there. He said, you really got your stuff together now. So during that time, I was talking to Margaret about it, that I didn't really understand mode. For some reason, I look at it now, I say it's easy to understand mode, da da dee da da with the voice. And so Margaret said, hey man, a whole lot of piano players didn't understand mode at the time. It seems so simple, not just the basic idea of how you're supposed to do with the clusters and stuff. But then, man, it was foreign to me. I could, But so yeah, that was from April 1st of April until about April 24th. Then I left. He said, I got a gig for you. So I went and worked with Sonny Rollins at the Berlin for a week. And then shortly after that, I joined J.J. Johnson's band,
Wow.
Yeah, so.
I envy your experiences.
Yeah, it's been, as I say, I've been around the block a few times,
Well, just to wrap up, I can tell that you're proud to be a jazz musician, and you're proud of your fellow jazz musicians.
Right.
I mean, you were saying yesterday that jazz musicians are some of the most intelligent, well-rounded people you know.
They really are, man. Because like I said, any subject matter you name, anyone, anything, they're doing it somewhere. Ophthalmologists, they're doing it. Optometrists, speaking different languages, they're doing it. Herbie Hancock, electrical engineer, so it's no cause. I mean, once he was talking, because Oscar Peterson had tremendous respect for Herbie. He said in print. And they was talking about it one time. I got this video called In the Key of Oscar. It's a very good video. I don't know if you can get it in the station. You might have to call the Film Institute of Canada in Toronto and get it. Margaret has it, and it's Oscar doing a reunion with his family members because he had been estranged from a couple of his kids because he was so busy traveling and they couldn't understand. I can't be here with you because I'm trying to go out here and make this money so I can send you to the kind of, you know what I mean? But they had to come together, and Oscar talked about a lot of stuff. And like he said, no, I don't go out to intimidate nobody. He said, but if you get in my way, I'll run over you musically. And he cleared that up, but you know what I'm saying. But he was talking about Herbert Hancock. Herbert said, well, you know about the electric piano. And Herbert said, well, you know, Oscar, I think Oscar's scared of the electric piano. Oscar, you tell Herbert Hancock he better hope and pray that I don't come out, because Oscar was the kind of cat, if he could, Oscar knew a lot about the electric piano, because in his studio, he had every electric instrument. He said, but I don't want to do an electric piano day for the sake of doing it. He said, I can do 3 trio days in one day in less than 3 hours, you know. But he said, no, Herbert's been begging me on to do, but he has tremendous respect for Herbert, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
Wow.
you know, but I feel good that I've had a chance to be around some great people. I wish I could have been around Art Tatum. I never saw Art Tatum in person.
Mm-hmm.
I never saw my other hero, Nat Cole, in person. I did see Bird, but not up close in person. I did see him standing outside the club, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel I've been blessed because, as I said before, musicians are, man, wide range, you know. Jimmy Heath, computer. Frank Foster, computer. Ben Brown, computer. Dr. Dennis Zeidler, practicing psychiatry. Dr. I. Davis, psychiatry. Peter Roker, attorney at law. The list just goes on and on. Sir Charles Thompson could be a golf pro. Joe Williams, golf. Lou Donaldson, Jimmy Cobb, Keita Best, Freddie Green, Ray Brown, mean with the stick. Ray Brown, heck of a businessman. You know, Hubert Laws go out and do concerts too with Jean-Pierre Rampal, play their stuff, and they couldn't play here. Hubert Laws, you know, that flute, you know, Julius Bob, I think, was his principal flautist with the Philharmonic. So, you know, jazz musician, man, Herbert just did a George Gershwin classical Chopin type concert with a Chinese pianist named Lang Lang. And Herbert took off 5 months and got a teacher just to mainly deal with certain fingering. And he practiced diligently. And Garnett Brown, another one of my hometown, a great trombone player, unsung hero. His name is Garnett Brown. He did some orchestration for Herbert. He did the soundtrack for a movie called Harlem Nights with Richard Pryor. He wrote the music for that. He went to school with Reggie Miller's father in Memphis, Tennessee, Saul Miller, you know, but he never gets any credit, but he's a tremendous, we call him Tut, King Tut, and he's like #1 in California. He knows a lot about the college game. He's always renting TVs and videos and stuff, you know. But Herbert did this classical type thing with Lang Lang, and Garnett went to see it and said it was overwhelming because Herbert Hancock, well, he's a Mozart major, but anything he puts his mind to do, when he's going to do it, he's going to do it extremely well. That's why I say, you know, and I told you, Keith Jarrett did the Goldberg variation, and the classical musician said, wow, gee whiz. Ahmad Jamal was playing Litz Etudes when he was 11 years old with the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. He never talks about it, so the list goes on and on and on, you know.
And you seem to have found a good partner working relationship with Eric Alexander, too.
Oh, yeah, that's
great to see.
About him. He's so phenomenal, and he gets better, and he's so smart. Aside expert skill, he ran the Chicago Marathon a few years ago just to do it, and out of 20-something thousand, he finished in the top 600, and the winning time was 2 hours and 8 minutes. Eric's finishing time was 2 hours and 50 minutes. Can you believe that? Long distance runner. Wow. He'll go to Japan, he'll run 2 hours before the gig. You know, so I have tremendous respect for him because, first of all, you got to be in some kind of physical shape to play this music. Now, if you just sit up there talking about cocktail China, that's okay. Well, you just play it. But if you're talking about hardcore, swinging hard, stamina, and as a piano player, well, I got to play for 3 and 4 and 5 courses behind each play. I got to be physically in shape. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I feel very blessed that they created, bestowed this little bit of talent on me. So since I got it, I just try to pursue it more and get better, you know, because every day you learn something, you know. It's something to put in your sack of surprises, musically speaking, or whatever, you know.
Okay.
Because you need your bag of tricks, so to speak, so when the guys come around, they come in to hear some of the piano players. I remember one time I played a place called Bradley. Might have been on one of my plays. 10 piano players came. Sir Roland Hanna, Jackie Byard. That's another unsung hero. Jackie Byard, man. Oh, what a tremendous musician. But he never got his total recognition. George Coleman's never got his total recognition that he deserved. And the most underrated, unappreciated musician of all time, Phineas Newborn Jr. And I to this day, I don't understand that. Maybe it's jealousy. It's like, how dare you to be that good? Here's a man who could put his right hand in his pocket and play complete composition with his right hand. There's a record called World of the Piano. I brought it up here with me that every piano player should have. So Hank Jones once said, I'm trying to figure out what it is about Phineas. He has two right hands. Tommy Flanagan loved him. Ahmad Jamal loved him. But they really dogged him, just to tell you the truth, that, and hopefully one day, I don't know how, something can be done, because he should be alive and well, but he was hardworking. You see? So if you're not tough scared out here, between the system and some of the critics and some of the musicians, and you can listen to what they say and believe it, hey man, you'll go under. But I refuse to let them do that to me. I said, well, thank you very much. You're entitled to your opinion, because I'm not saying everybody's got to be a Harold Mayburn fan, So I just do what I do, and if I'm honest, and if I'm okay with the Most High, and if I'm not okay with you, then it's your problem. I'm not perfect, but I'm pure in heart.
Yeah.
And that's the philosophy that I live by. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
Yeah.
it's a good one, and
Yeah.
I have learned some nice surprises from you in the last 2
Well, I
days.
hope
So
it's something that can
Yeah.
be beneficial.
Yeah. I want to thank you for your time
Thank
today. I
you.
look
Thank
forward to
you.
your concert tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Monk. Well, my pleasure.
All right.
Yeah.